Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. Bear with me if I repeat some of the things the previous two speakers have spoken about, but there's obviously some common themes through our presentations. I'm also going to bring a perspective from a project-based company. Phoenix, a service-based company with ongoing agreements and longer-term things. Golding is very much a project-based company, so we have different challenges. But as Carly mentioned, I've been with Golding for quite a long time, 23 years. But I originally started out with as an engineer with Citra Constructions, and they were a French company but had an Australian management team, and they were involved in all sorts of jobs. The Boondooma Dam diversion tunnel. The last job I did with them was the railway electrification. So we did from Mackay down to Oakey Creek, up to Goonyella, out to Blair Athol, then we did from Torbanlea up to Gladstone. So then I moved to Golding, and I did the, started off in the Twin Waters Resort Golf Course as the project manager, doing the bulk earthworks for that, and then did 8 to 9 months of commuting between Caboolture and Gladstone back in 1990. So people have been doing the zip backwards and forwards from Brisbane to Gladstone for a long time. But yeah, I've been in Gladstone ever since. So what I'd like to do is just give you a brief history of Golding. Cyril Golding started the business hauling logs with a 5-tonne truck, but he had a half sharing. That was in 1942. 1 to 2 years later, he bought his partner out, and over the time he moved into earth moving, because while he's on properties knocking trees down for people in the Boyne Valley and up in the Biloela area, the property owners would say, can you just clear a dam for me, or just knock a little wall up there so I can catch some water on the property? Now Cyril had by that time bought a dozer, but he didn't have a blade because he just used the dozer to help haul the logs onto the timber jinkers. So he went out and bought a blade, started pushing dirt around for people. And that was the genesis of Cyril Golding earth moving. So he had logging, earth moving, and he also started hauling coal from Callide Mine down to Gladstone, in the early days. So I think also when he was in Biloela clearing, John Holland had just won the contract to build the Callide A power station. So John Holland sort of saw this guy working next door and said, look, can you come over and do all the clearing on the site for us, because that was part of their contract. So Cyril said, yeah, okay. So he was there, he was handy, he said yes. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that Cyril took his opportunities. He was out and about, he was out where the work was happening, but when opportunities arose, he grabbed hold of them. That was right through to when QAL started. Cyril Golding Earth Moving was in Gladstone. The Kaiser engineers needed somebody to do all the site preparation work. Cyril said, okay. And getting back to the story of, the question was raised earlier about how do you get on these tender lists? Well, here's Cyril. I hate to think what the turnover was. It was probably not very much. Self-taught man, didn't know much, but he asked questions. He went to those people and said, look, I don't really know what I'm doing here. Can you help me out? And most of these organisations are trying to find the best deal for the project. So I just encourage you to, if you're having difficulty, go and see the contracts people for these organisations, because as I say, they're after the best deal for their project. As I'll get on to more about innovation a bit later on. So Cyril Golding Earth Moving was in town when Boyne Smelters came around, and the name was changed in 1990 to Golding Contractors to reflect the more concrete side of things. And the first part of that expansion was doing all the concrete works for the Stanwell Power Station. So we did all the boiler house and precipitator foundations for the power station out there. Cyril sold the business in 2008 to Champ Private Equity, and he retired at 87. He had a vision to be working longer than his father. His father retired at 86, so Cyril retired at 87. Just want to show you a bit of a graph of the turnover of Golding Contractors, schematically. See if this works. Down here, that's 1980. So Cyril started in 1942, somewhere over here. 1980. Turnover about $250,000 a month. During this time here, Cyril took on a change in structure, had a general manager come on board, had a full-time accountant come on board. Previous to that, he just used to do his own bookwork and things like that. But as you grow, you need to put in structures, and we've heard that talked about today. At the end of the 90s, this is when the concrete work started to add to the business. There's a big blip there, I'll talk about that later on. And then we did a little bit of mining here, but mining took off during this period, and then obviously the business has just gone in a large expansion since then. And you can see the blip in 2010, which was the GFC, which I'm sure we all remember fondly. So with that background, I'd just like to go through some of my reflections of growth, innovation and sustainability, and that's based on being part of Goldings, which has been a fairly successful company, and obviously keen to increase and keen to go on to bigger and better things. So first thing I'd like to talk about is growing pains. So having been through a company or worked with a company that has grown, it's not all plain sailing or smooth sailing. So I'm sure most of you have heard that the best way to make a small fortune in the construction industry is to start with a big fortune. As this is not the position where most people start their business life, the way you avoid going backwards is through managing your business risks in all their forms. So that's safety, financial, reputation, execution, legal risks, you know the whole gambit. As I understand, the audience is comprised of representatives from mostly small to medium business enterprises. I'd like to start with some comments on the changes that occur when going from small to medium to larger businesses. My observation is that businesses start with an individual or maybe partners, in Golding's case that was Cyril, who have a passion in a particular area of work, be that supplying trade services or business services, all things like that. But a common thread is that the business owner has the skills to perform the work tasks and the drive to say that they can provide this service to others and to do it better than what they have experienced or have seen others doing. They work extremely hard, do most if not all the tasks themselves, and find a sense of achievement and satisfaction in running their own show. A similar experience, I believe, applies to branch managers who are given the task of going to an area or to build up the business in a particular area. They have a passion to make it happen and work extremely hard to achieve that. For small businesses, growth is largely based on the effort of a small number of individuals. As the business succeeds and grows, though, the individual effort is no longer able to cope with the workload and additional staff are required. This is the first unnerving step in the growth path, losing control of all the levers. While it may be relatively easy to hand over areas of the business such as bookkeeping or things like that, it's much harder to hand over control of things that are your core skills. To grow, you need to hand some of the control or authority to others because you can't do it all yourself. You can't delegate responsibility without also giving the appropriate authority, though, otherwise the person can't effectively perform the task. As this process is repeated time and again, as the business expands and the management structure grows with it, you can see that it's an ongoing issue that you have to deal with. Particularly if you're the owner, you're the major shareholder, this is something that you've got to be conscious of. You've probably heard the example where a senior manager had to hire someone that would report to them, so to protect their position, they thought, well, I better not hire somebody who's as good or better than me, I'll just hire someone that's a little bit less than me, because I want to be here for the long haul. So they hire someone who's about 90% capable. That person, as the business grows, has to hire someone. So they say, ooh, gee, careful here. I've got to look after my position, so I'll hire someone who's just not quite so capable as me as well. So in 2 quick steps, you're hiring people that are 81% of your capability, and you're the business owner thinking everything's going on famously. You need to be hiring people that can replace you. You want to be moving through the organisation, so you also need to be hiring people who can come up and fill your shoes. So to have a business that's being filled with people that are less capable than yourself is not a good look for a sustainable business. There's also a difference between what a person is capable of doing and what their skills are. Additional skills can be taught as training is provided, but if the person doesn't have the underlying capability to take on the new skills, the training will be wasted. As the business grows, roles move from being generalist in nature to specialist. While the owner or manager or CEO has to provide leadership and maintain a generalist overview of the business, the roles reporting to them become more specialised to be able to cope with the volume and complexity of the work. In my time since moving to Gladstone, my role has changed many times. From starting in a position where I was working on contract administration, my accountability has expanded to include quality assurance, estimating, IT, safety, environmental matters, getting certification of our systems and those things. And that happened as the business grew and needs arose, and a lot of those needs were driven by clients. You need this. Okay, here we go, down that path. That might be okay for a company with a $20 million turnover, but it's unsustainable in the growing company. That same group of 6 tasks is now run by 6 departments. So as you can see, the structure changes, and while that can be unnerving for people in my position, I used to look after all these things, that was pretty cool, busy but cool. Now I look after this bit, and there's a whole group of other people, and that's a mindset that you have to keep thinking through. It's best for the business for that to happen. It's not possible to keep across and address the issues that arise in each business area, and specialists are either developed internally, preferably, or brought into the business to bring enhanced skills and capability. A clear example of this would be in the finance and taxation world, where you engage specialists rather than trying to keep up with all the current taxation laws yourself. So after talking about growing pains, let's talk about the obstacles to growth. And this isn't a totally negative presentation, but I just want to give you some ideas of what happens. There are many obstacles to growth, no matter how good your marketing and business development efforts are, and I want to briefly touch on a few of them. Cash management. Cash management is always critical, and you need to make sure you can survive if, or more likely when, one of your key debtors is late in payment. This becomes more evident as the scope of work you undertake increases and the amount owed by individual debtors increases. In our case, that can be up somewhere between $6 and $10 million a month from one debtor. So if that doesn't turn up on the day it's supposed to turn up, life can be interesting if you haven't got your bases covered. I'm sure your financial advisors emphasise the importance of cash management, and they can explain it a lot better than me. Bank guarantees or performance securities are also an issue that need to be carefully managed in a growing business, as they can be a significant constraint. Contracts are usually structured so that some form of security is required to provide an incentive for performance. Sometimes this is cash taken from payments until a certain amount is held, or alternatively, some sort of financial security is held in lieu of cash retention. This could be a bank guarantee, or I've heard of insurance bonds being used. Having up to 10% of your cash flow being held each progress claim, which is what these contracts call for, can really affect your cash flow situation. So the alternative is very attractive to have your bank guarantees in place. The issue to be aware of here, though, is that these guarantees are required before work can begin, and they take some time to organise. Bank guarantees are basically a piece of paper that you hand that over to the client. The client has that at their mercy. If they say, you aren't performing, contractor, they walk into the bank and say, I want that money. And the bank has to give them that money. There's no if, buts, maybes. It's that straightforward, that simple. So banks are very keen to make sure that their position is protected. They want to understand the risk they're taking on. So you can't walk into a bank and say, let's have a bank guarantee for this amount of money. It takes a fair while to get in place. So for be mindful of the contract tail, where the requirement of bank guarantees in some form will typically be required until the expiry of the defects liability period, which can be well after the work is complete. So for a growing business, this means arranging a facility that caters for expanding turnover, save up to 10% of this turnover that you're expecting to have, plus the bank guarantees that have to remain in place until a contract is closed out, which can be anywhere between 2.5% and 5% of the contract sum from periods of 3 to 18 months. So it can be quite a financial burden. Following up with clients to ensure bank guarantees are returned as soon as possible is an important contract management task. Next constraint's people and equipment. Growth in our industry is never a smooth line. It's determined project by project, and projects are never the same size. As businesses grow and the project or work packages undertaken get bigger, the step change gets bigger as well. This step change nature of the revenue stream provides challenges for resource utilisation, both people and equipment. The effort required when new work arrives will almost always not match your current capability when you're working on projects. You'll either have too many resources or not enough. So equipment capability and the people needed to operate them is fairly straightforward to assess using productivity rates, etc. If your own resources can't cover it, you can go to the market and hire them, either for the short term or the medium term. But before you go on and commit to capital expenditure or employ people permanently, you have to be confident in the prospect of future work. And that can be sometimes a bit of a punt, but also a bit of a reflection on how confident you are in your business. The people requirements in the service and support roles, though, is a lot harder to quantify. That's both on site and in the home office. In these roles, people tend to get stretched in times of growth, and Steve talked about that, and I'm sure Rod talks about, knows about that as well. With growing businesses, you have your senior management team and your middle management team, and they're the ones that, okay, we'll just get this next job, it's good for the business, and you're the ones getting stretched and stressed. So what you have to do is then try and work out when is it that you actually employ new people, and that can be a very difficult point to decide on. Again, it's a bit of a punt to say, okay, the current level of management or support team will get you to a certain point. At a stretch, they can get to the next point, but when I employ someone else, they can actually take us to the next level. Can you cover that gap in the meantime until that next work rolls in? Stretching people is not sustainable, however. So they can do it in the short term, but in the long term it can't happen. As I showed you on that turnover graph, there was a bit of a blip in 1987. That's when we went up to Townsville and did the Korea Zinc site earthworks. That increased our turnover by 47% in the 1 year. And as you also may have noticed, it dropped back to the previous level for the next 2 years. I think it nearly killed us all. And it took us that long to recover, or it seemed like it took that long to recover anyway. Then the management structure built up and we're able to expand to the level that we've shown there. Capacity versus capability. I've talked about assessing the capacity required to perform the work ahead of you, but you also need to manage the capability of the organisation. As the business grows, and as I've said, this usually happens in steps rather than smoothly, it's important to maintain an understanding of the complexity of the work that is required of roles. To illustrate this simply, the work of a project manager on a $1 million contract is a lot less complex than that of a project manager on a $150 million contract. And as your business grows and the chunks of work you take on increase, that capability needs to be built into your organisation. And it applies across all roles. Be aware that the increase in capability of some individuals may not be able to grow at the same rate as the organisation. In a growing company, employees will come along the journey with you, but they may need to be in different roles to match their capability. So in these cases, people's expectations need to be managed carefully but decisively. Move on to going global. Golding to date has completed works in Queensland and done a very little bit of work in New South Wales. You'd hardly call that global even if you are a parochial Queenslander. But what's happened is the world came to us and set the standard. And both Steve and Rod have talked about that as well. So in central Queensland, this has been happening for a long time. It's come to us in terms of large projects sponsored by international organisations and project managed by international companies. They bring with them global thinking, expectations and standards on the way of doing business. In Gladstone, we're currently thinking more of the LNG work, but it's been happening in central Queensland for ages. We had Xstrata, international mining company. BHP, as they used to be called, joined with Billiton to become BHP Billiton, and they are part of the BHP Billiton Mitsubishi Alliance. They are international global companies who have got their influence on the way we do business, because we have to do business the way that matches their requirements. So these international clients that have come to Gladstone in particular at the moment are investing a lot of money, and they engage organisations who have given them the confidence that they have the capability, systems and track record to manage the construction of these large projects successfully. It's not new for Gladstone, and I'll just give some examples. And I said it's not new for Central Queensland, but Kaiser Engineers were engaged to construct the Queensland Aluminium Refinery back in the 1960s. There was an American company, came in and they built it with the use of local contractors. Bechtel were engaged in the early 1980s on the Boyne Smelter project, and again in 97 on the third pot line. They were also the constructor on the Mackay Aluminium Refinery stages 1 and 2. And Worley Parsons are engaged on the Wiggins Island Coal Export Terminal, the WICET project. BHP Billiton are using Bechtel to deliver the Hub project, which is on the BMA mines in central Queensland, and there's billions of dollars being spent out there right now as we speak. And of course Bechtel are heavily involved in the LNG projects. Now this isn't an advertisement for the major players, but it's a clear demonstration of how the footprint of these global companies is impacting on us, and particularly on Golding, because we've worked on all those projects mentioned. So the next point is everybody in the supply chain needs to be on board. So this global expectation passes down to the contractors, subcontractors and suppliers. Golding has to assure the project management contractor that we will deliver in accordance with the contract requirements, and that means being confident that companies that supply goods and services to us can also deliver in accordance with those requirements. And we've got to provide evidence to these companies well and truly before we get the work. We have to give them confidence that if they give the work to us, we will deliver. And that means being able to demonstrate good systems capability and a bit of a track record. In recent times, Golding has been involved with business at both client and supplier level that are based overseas, and this has provided some new working conditions that needed to be managed. These range from frequent trips overseas by senior management to submit and negotiate proposals before we get the work, time zone differences for teleconferences and meetings, managing date differences for submittal deadlines, differing public holidays, offshore inspection of fabricated goods, importation of marine vessels, and hiring specialist piling equipment from offshore. So all of these presented challenges to us, but we have to learn from them. They weren't business as usual, but we have to take those learnings on board and use them to help strengthen the company going forward. Innovation. So the first thing is that the competitive tendering system drives innovation. Every tender that is submitted is put in at the lowest sustainable price, and if you want to win your fair share, or more than your fair share, you have to be working on ways to do things smarter, quicker, with less waste, and use less resources, etc. So you need to adopt current proven technology. This doesn't mean you have to have the latest whiz-bang gadget on the market, but practical things. You should also assess the level of service and support that any new technology or IT application will come with. If the innovation affects one or more of your core business functions, even though you may have determined that it will provide a business advantage, you have to assess the risk of it failing and how quickly this can be corrected. Golding has just gone through a major exercise of implementing SAP as our enterprise resource planning tool. That took 18 months worth of planning, 18 months worth of implementation, and 2 years later, 3 years later, we're actually still learning how to implement that system properly. But we made sure there was support during the implementation and afterwards to be able to make sure that all hangs together for us. The once groundbreaking use of lasers and GPS guidance systems for survey and earth moving equipment is standard now, and the resulting productivity gains are factored into our submissions. It's no longer a competitive advantage, nice to have or optional. You have to have it to be competitive. In an article by Robert Gottliebson in Business Spectator last week, he talks about the skills shortage and how the implementation of effective IT solutions can be used to overcome the problem of having skilled people in one location and work needs in another. This obviously can't translate to manual tasks, However, there is no one magic bullet in business life, but improving IT capability can be part of the solution. The ultimate adoption of IT technology would be, again going back to Cyril, computers came around sort of in the mid-80s. Cyril got one of the very first computers in Gladstone at the time. It was, I think he called it a Tandy, had a 9-inch floppy drive, ran on BASIC. He actually took himself to TAFE to learn BASIC and wrote, because there's no software available, wrote estimating programs so that he could work out productivities, and he loved that sort of mathematical work. He was 67. So you cannot stop learning, you cannot stop grabbing hold of the opportunities that are presented to you. Most of us will be well and truly thinking about retirement by then, and here he is going off to learn what these newfangled computers are all about. If you do get involved in R&D, make sure that it will provide benefit to your core business, so precious resources are not unnecessarily redirected from effectively operating your business. Everybody's busy, and particularly in times of resource shortages, make sure you're concentrating the effort where it's needed. Another very important part of innovation is system review. Regularly reviewing your systems also brings innovation and improvement to your business. Can the system be made simpler? Can steps be removed? Does the process only involve those who have made decisions? Does the process only involve those who have to make decisions or to take action? And is there redundancy that can be removed? Now, it sounds fairly straightforward, but if you actually work through some of the things that your people do and you do yourself, it's interesting to put it down, draw it out, and actually see who gets involved. And then you can sit back and go, well, why do they need to know? Why do they need to be involved? They're accountable for that role. Let them deal with it. You don't need to tell the world in some cases. That just takes up people's time. Keep in mind also that in the rush to become innovative and adopt new technologies, automating a process does not fundamentally improve the efficiency of your business if the underlying process is overly complex or inefficient. An often overlooked aspect of innovation or change is the implementation actions. Whenever a change to a business system occurs or a new system is developed, it's crucial that the owner of the system within the business assesses the requirements for its successful implementation. You can have a great idea, you can have it all laid out, but if the business doesn't use it or doesn't know how to use it, you've wasted all that effort. So, questions to ask when you want to implement something new. And we talked about change, Rod's talked about change. If you want to implement the change, how will it be communicated? Who needs to be trained in it? Who needs to be aware of it? You may not be part of the new system, but maybe you just need to be aware of it. Who will create the training documentation? In a resource-stretched business, who are you going to allocate? Okay, great idea, you go and write the training material. But I haven't got time. Well, it's not going to be implemented correctly if you don't put the effort in. How will the implementation be measured? How will you know when it's been implemented correctly? Is that through an assessment sheet or through specific training requirements, pre-start talks? How are you going to actually determine that it's worked? And that's okay to catch the people who are already in your business. How are you going to feed that new system into new starters where that system applies to their role? The system owner is then accountable for the successful implementation of all those actions. Sustainability. Sustainability means many things to many people, but in the construction or any project-based industry, I take it to mean the ability to continue in business. This is driven largely by your past, or more truly, your last performance. A key component of us as Golding being able to remain in business is maintaining our social licence to operate. It's not a physical certificate, but it means clients will let us work for them, people will want to work for us, and we are accepted in the communities in which we work. To maintain this social licence to operate, we have to provide safe workplaces and behave professionally and ethically with the various parties that we deal with. And the reputation wraps into this a little bit. People in the industry soon find out how a business works simply by word of mouth. So even amongst the major players, they get a feel for how your business sits within the marketplace. People moving from company to company, they get an understanding of how you operate. And the communities, as you grow, you move into different communities. As I said, Golding haven't done much work in New South Wales or outside Queensland. When we go to that new community, we're going to have to prove to those people that we are worthy to be in their community. So it's an issue that you have to keep in the forefront of your mind, and it certainly affects your ability to be sustainable. Documented systems. Formalised work systems allow the business to continue to grow in a sustainable manner. It might sound a bit dramatic, but documented systems are a key asset right from when you pre-qualify for a tender through to bringing new personnel into the business. I would not like to count the number of hours that we've saved by being able to tick the couple of boxes at the start of the pre-qualification or the tender submission that says, are your safety, quality and environmental systems third-party certified? That's one tick. Tick the no box, and then you have to go through all the rigmarole of explaining what you do have in place every time you put a tender in. So our systems are third-party certified to a recognised international standard, and that helps us. But the importance of systems stretches well beyond these international standards and tender submissions. They just get your foot in the door. What's really important is how you run your business, and they're the internal systems. So the other systems are used to describe how all key business processes work: your procurement system, your maintenance system, your employee relations system, all facets of the business. Growing businesses get to the point where they struggle to provide the one-on-one training and mentoring, which is the hallmark of small business. We have 1,600 direct employees, probably another 400 contract employees. You can't get around to everybody and say, this is how you do the job. You need your systems to be able to be self-explanatory so that you can actually roll them out and say, if you sit at your desk and follow this process, you won't get any of us in trouble. New people can be directed to a suite of procedures that describe what is required in their role. So for all this system talk to work, the systems need to be effective. And what does that mean? Well, systems need to be well thought through and owned by a senior manager, clearly defined, as simple a process as possible, readily identifiable regarding who does what and how others interact with it, and it needs to be auditable. In a growing business, you need to be able to go around and check to see that people are following the right steps. And if you don't have buy-in by this senior management level, people will not follow the systems. People will do what they think is good for them at that moment. And if they're stressed, stretched, and all those other things that people get to, they will do their own thing. Not to undermine the business, but because they think that's the effort they can put in at that time. So it's a statement of fact that as businesses expand, it becomes critical that clear systems of work are developed and implemented to provide consistency in outcome. And a clear example of that is, as I said earlier, we've got these major players have come into Gladstone on this LNG project, and they are saying, well, this is the way you communicate with us. We don't have emails, we don't have this. You actually have to submit all your documentation through their portal, internet portal. So it's not, oh, we think we've got a better idea. Well, maybe, but no, in this particular job, you have to comply with that requirement. So I think it's very important. And it's, we're struggling with that as a business too. We've got various clients, they all have good ideas. Wouldn't it be good for you to use that? Well, I'm getting paid a lot of money to implement my system on this job, sir, so you will use it. Okay, thank you. Move on. Don't fret about it. So the other thing I'd like to talk about in sustainability is the end game. So when considering the role of sound formal systems and documentation and the role that they play, you should also consider your end game. You'll want something to sell when the time is right for you if you're a small business owner. If at the end of all your labours you are the only one that knows anything about everything and what goes on, you are limiting who you can sell to. Your market will probably be someone who knows the trade and they may pay you for the goodwill based on your customers, a trade buyer. If you have a well-structured business, sound document management system in place and capable staff, you're opening up the range of potential buyers to include people with good managerial skills who can run a business while relying on others for the technical knowledge. That, for example, in the mould of a professional CEO who might be cashed up and want to run his own business. Or you also have the opportunity to have the interest of general investment groups such as private equity firms, as has occurred with Golding. And Champ provided us with financial leverage and support, but they relied on the management team to run the day-to-day business. And business must be an ongoing concern, or must be a going concern, as the accountants say. This is not possible if all your staff leave with you or you have no systems to bind the work and team together. And that's what happens during the due diligence process. These teams come through and they actually scour the business to see how is it run. And if it's one person centric, that's a devaluation on the value of the business. So in conclusion, my key messages for a growing, globally ready, innovative and sustainable business are: take the opportunities that come your way, even if it is a bit of a stretch. Surround yourself with capable people and give them the authority to perform their role. Define and document the systems you use in your business. Adopt new innovations and general system improvement. But before you make changes, make sure you understand what effect it will have on the business. Some questions to ask are: who in the business owns the system being affected? What's wrong with the current system? What effect will it have across the business? Is the system clearly defined and documented? Are authorities and accountabilities in place to allow the system to function as designed? Has the system got proper controls built in? How are you going to implement it? And don't forget, what will it cost? Thank you.